So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Hemophilia Society and the Hemophilia Society of Bangladesh webinar. I'm happy that everybody could join us. We may have a couple people joining in the next few minutes, so while we do the introductions, some people may come in. So my name is Michel Long. I'm the National Program Coordinator at the Canadian Hemophilia Society, and I'll be moderating this webinar. This webinar is an actual activity of the HSB-CHS twinning partnership, and the presentation will be done in two parts, and we've planned about 1 hour to do this webinar. There will be a question period after each part where you may ask your questions and make any comments. For the people in Canada, they are on the phone, so we'll be able to hear them. For the people in Bangladesh, you don't have access to the phone or your microphone. So what we would ask is that if you have questions, please type them in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And once you've typed your question or comment, make sure to send to everyone. You have a scroll down menu where you can choose who you're sending to. So you can send to everyone and then press the button send. So you can do a test now if you want. If you want to type something, say hello, just to make sure it works. So I'll be giving just a couple of technical aspects before we begin. And again, people in Bangladesh, if you could just type hello, just to make sure that I know you're hearing, this would be good. So for people in Bangladesh, and once again, you only have the visual, and so please use the chat function, and I will be reading the questions. You may not be able to see them at the end. For the Canadians, if you've joined by phone, please turn off your computer speaker in order to eliminate any interference or feedback. And for your information, this webinar is being recorded. And what we hope, if everything goes well, what we hope to do is to be able to share this webinar later on, perhaps later today or early next week, so that people who were not able to come to the webinar and participate live can actually watch it after the fact. And for those who participated, you can review it again if you wish. So I don't see any typing from the people in Bangladesh. Could you please just type something so I can see that you are hearing the webinar?
The typing, Michelle, it's coming through on my computer.
Okay. Yeah, my microphone is close to the keyboard. Okay, so I think we're ready to begin. Well, I understand they're hearing clearly in Bangladesh, so we're ready to go. So the first part of the webinar has to do with governance models in terms of structure, and we'll be having Pam and Eric present for this part. And I'd like to welcome both Eric and Pam, and Eric will be taking over the presentation at this point. So Eric, please.
Thank you, Michel. It's a pleasure to be here, linked around the world through technology, quite an amazing thing. As we talk about governance models, basically what we're talking about is how to set up a board to do good work so that eventually our vision of treatment for all can become realized. The models we're going to be looking at are kind of twofold. One is the reality that we think applies to Bangladesh now, but also as the Bangladeshi society matures and grows, some governance models that may need to change in that direction. So I'm assuming you can all see this slide says characteristics of good governance. And there's 8 characteristics mentioned here. A accountable, so a board should be known to do its work and held to a standard of doing that, transparent, nothing secret going on, responsive, it listens to the members, equitable and inclusive, it's not an elite group, but looks to have the right people on board, consensus oriented, so it's not dictatorial, but looking for the wisdom that comes from the group, participatory, all voices are heard, follows the rules of law. Obviously, you want to not disobey the law and therefore put your society in jeopardy. And effective and efficient, being as effective and efficient as we can. Personally, I like to think of two words primarily when I think of good governance. One is direct, and the other is protect. When you look at these four words, they can kind of go under those two large categories. But when I think of my own participation previously on the Canadian Hemophilia Society Board and currently on the World Federation of Hemophilia Society Board, those are the two big things I think. We direct by creating strategy, by listening to our members, being accountable. We protect through compliance to the government and compliance to what we said we were going to do. That's, again, the idea of accountability. So if you're going to summarize good governance, to me, those words direct and protect come into play, and these 8 qualities should be part of what characterizes a good board. So we're going to look at kind of 3 aspects of a range of governance models. From very hands-on board called a working board, and my understanding would be that in Bangladesh, this is really the kind of board that you have. To a board that makes all decisions by policy, it's called a Policy Governance Board or Carver Board. The reason Carver is actually the last name of a fellow by the name of John Carver that years ago created this understanding of what a board is to do. When we talk about a Carver board, it's a very theoretical one when there's staff. And so even the World Federation Canadian Hemophilia Society isn't a true Carver board. But we want to introduce some of these ideas so you not only can see what is the good about where you are, but where you might need to go in the future. So the first, you can call it way over on one side would be a working board. This is where the board members themselves carry out either much or all of the work individually or on committees. Committees report to the board. Now it says CEO reports to the full board. When you don't have a CEO, it would be the chairman of the board who is actually reporting to the full board. Of course, decisions are by vote. But when we talk about vote, again, we're trying to reach consensus so that the decisions by vote reflect the wisdom and consensus of the board. Basically, the idea is that a working board does the work itself. Rarely are there staff, or if there's staff, only a few. And the board and staff are really working together in very close harmony to accomplish the strategy and the work of the society. The next is what we call the mix. By mixed, we mean a difference, the mix between actual working and then policy setting. So this is kind of close to what the CHS and WFH would be. The next slide is actually closer. But this is where a board establishes a committee structure and along functional lines. The committees are supported by staff. So again, it's the idea if you have staff, you can go into a mixed board setting. Volunteers give leadership to the committees, but the committees are supported by the staff. Board members and staff carry out the work together, so those lines are a little bit more blurred here. The committees report to the board. And the CEO, assuming, again, if you have staff, chances are the first staff you're going to hire is some kind of director, reports to the chair or full board. Now, when it says reports to the chair, oftentimes, and in the WFH this is true, it's the president and the 2 vice presidents that together hold the chair accountable, and then they give a report to the full board. So the full board, in a sense, is holding the president accountable as well. And of course, decisions are by vote. In this and the next one we're going to look at, a very important aspect on this is to really well define what are board roles, and what are staff roles, and what are the relationships between the two. So as the possibility of becoming staff in Bangladesh happens, then you can move to more of a mixed board. Then a policy board, and again, this isn't, when it says a traditional policy board, it's not a true policy board. It's not quite all the way to policy, but very policy oriented. This is very much where both the Canadian Hemophilia Society and the World Fed would be. The board establishes extensive committee structure, often along functional lines. I can't remember how many committees the World Federation has, but we have an extensive committee structure for sure. The roles of the individual board members are quite different. So each board member would carry a portfolio. Again, the committees are supported by staff, led by volunteers, but supported by staff. Staff very much carry out the work. Committees report to the board. Again, the CEO usually reports to the chair or a small group, and decisions are by both. So you can see that both the working board and policy board have overlaps, but you're moving more towards setting strategy, looking at big picture. Once that is set, the actual execution of that strategy or the operationalization, big word, it just means to take a strategy and make it work in the trenches of everyday living happen. That's where it's moving toward. So a working board is going to set up a strategy so that they're going to complete it. Traditional or true policy board would create the strategy, then the staff would be more assigned to the actual work of creating action plans and these kind of things. In a true policy board, they only set limits and goals. They don't actually involve themselves. There's very little committee work. Everything is done by the full board. So to me, CHS and World Fed have the best of both worlds. But again, the most important part, if you're moving in this direction, is to well-define staff and board relationships. And the next slide is a board role continuum. And Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you now to complete the rest of this portion of our governance session. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I'm just noticing on the screen that some of you are having difficulty hearing. Well, I'll try to speak loudly, unless it's a technical problem.
Yeah, I think if you speak normal, it should be okay. Sometimes when the volume is too high, this is what causes the sound problem. So I'm adjusting it here, Pam. And if you present, Pam, please speak slowly. And also, I would invite people, if you want to see the image but larger, you can actually click on Maximize at the top right corner of your screen, and you'll see the full slide in as large as it gets in your screen. Okay, go ahead, Pam.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and I'm happy to be working with Eric on this project and joining you this morning. So the slide before you is called a continuum. And on a continuum, of course, that suggests to us that we're moving, that we're maybe constantly moving, sometimes more quickly than other times, sometimes slowing down, and sometimes moving not just in one direction, but we might slide into a direction or a place we've already been. So when we look at this slide, let's start at the far right-hand side. And as far as I understand, I would say that that's where HSB tends to be right now, because you're the board, but you're also doing most of the work. So you're making the decisions, and then it's up to you usually to carry that work through. Of course, there are more volunteers, but you're still doing almost everything. So you're at the far right-hand side of that slide, called Operations and Activities. So under there it says the majority of the board's work is comprised of actually doing the work. So you're the workers, you're the volunteers, you're the everything. So you'll start to move a bit more to the left as you mature, as you grow, as you have experience, as you become more savvy. You'll start moving a little bit more to the left of that. To get fully over to the far left-hand side to a policy board, you pretty much do need to have staff. And again, I would not say that the CHS is that far, nor would WFH, in my opinion, be that far. And I'm not even sure that we would want to be that far. Somewhere in the middle tends to work quite well. I'll just give you a bit of time just to glance over that slide a bit more. Okay, so the next slide, centralized versus decentralized. So you can operate as a single entity, or you could be a collection of independent organizations. And at CHS in Canada, we have experienced both. There can be really good reasons to be separate. And one of the examples that comes to mind for me is that here in my province, back in the days when we were learning about the tainted blood issues and taking action moving forward to advocate for our members and also to help set policy where this wouldn't happen again, some of our groups felt that they needed to be more independent so that they could move forward in ways that their local area wanted to do. So there may have been legal reasons, legal actions that they felt they needed to take, or it might have been a policy, it might have been a way they would move forward with that, whether it be with media, who they would ask to work with, what their outcome might be, any of their strategies. And so in that case, one large region in particular elected then to still be part of us, but to work more independently from us. So from the national point of view, that can be a good thing as well, because you can in some way distance yourself if you feel there is any potential for conflict, or if your whole organization hasn't come to consensus on the strategy and the things you might talk about. That's a way to kind of protect yourself and separate yourself from any issues that might fall out of that. The challenges to being separate as well would be that in some of your areas, you may not have enough skill, enough dedicated time, and the experience to get the things done and to get those things done according to the law and the regulations in that area. So that can also be a challenge to being separate. So what we really have, sorry, I want to go back there. So an example of not having that expertise around that, if your country is broken into provinces or states, you have to be aware of that there may be, and I think we talked about this when we were in Bangladesh, in some areas of the country there might be separate requirements, reporting structures, funding issues, taxation issues that have to be done. And so if you're separate, that may increase the amount of work that needs to be done while you're trying to satisfy what has to be done. So you often end up, also when you have that separate structure, you can end up competing for funding and donations. So the next slide, or sorry, the bottom of this one, where it says association and chapter. We mostly talk about chapter, and that's what we have in Canada, so that's where I'm going to focus. So you see here that you have a structure where you would have a single organization. So where it's a single organization, you could write in there Canadian Hemophilia Society, or you could write in Hemophilia Bangladesh Society. And then you would be broken down into your chapters. So in Canada, we have 10 chapters, we have 10 provinces, and that's the way we've chosen to do it. Stay with me here. In two of our larger chapters, because they're large in terms of the numbers of people we're serving, but also large geographically, we've broken those down into branches, or what we call here regional offices. So when you have a chapter, this allows for more local or regional flavor. So if there are quirky things or some differences within how things are culturally, the distances, perhaps even a language spoken, when you have chapters, this allows you to tailor your program or customize it a little more to take into account some of those differences. But still, you would be operating under the same bylaws, You'd still be following along your strategic plan. You would still deliver the core programs and services in each of these chapters. It also allows for better sharing of your resources. So whether those be monetary resources, your financial resources, or whether those are human resources. So if you have volunteers that are particularly skilled in accounting, or if you have a volunteer who's particularly skilled in education, or someone who's skilled in advocacy, you can use those volunteers on your national level to mentor those in your chapters. And vice versa, if you've got someone on the chapter level who's really good at one of those things, you can find ways to utilize those skills and experience on your national level. The other good thing around the chapter is that you can identify, by working closely together, your future leaders and mentor those future leaders to do those things that you'll need to have done on a national level. So using the chapter model, I'm still looking at this here slide that we've got in front of us. It's also easier to govern because if you decide what your priorities are and what your bylaws are, and you work together on the same format in terms of reporting your finances and sharing every income, it just works better. It's easier. You're not duplicating your work. You're also better able to protect your assets and be accountable to those people who are funding you or to individual donors. You can agree on your objectives, your purpose, which is going to come really out of your mission statement, and also your public image. So going forward, it's very important that you protect the public image of your society. So you want to be proud of anything that goes out there, but you're also going to be accountable for anything that goes out there. And you also don't want to cause any confusion to those you serve. So if you have a national organization and then you've got chapters, if you're all doing the same sorts of work and presenting the same sorts of things and sharing your funding, you're less likely to create any confusion to those people that you're serving. You sort of become one and the same. So someone in a chapter understands when they join at a chapter level that they're getting the services and they're under that big umbrella. So there's less confusion for people when you do that. Here on the slide, you can read through that, but basically what I'm saying is that communication is so important. So this isn't anything different whether we're volunteers or in our work or in our families, in any of our relationships. We know that communication is the top priority for us. If you think of any hemophilia organization, let's start with the World Federation. We're really just one big, huge family. And in a family, if your families are like my families, there are times when we disagree with one another. There are times when maybe there's less communication because for whatever reason we're hurting a little bit. Sometimes there's miscommunication. We send an email and someone picks up on the email, doesn't get the tone right, and suddenly we've got a problem. So we're a big family. But the important thing with the family is that although we may not always agree, when the going gets tough, we're there to support one another. And so with the communication, you have to be very careful. So just as we're communicating today, which still never ceases to amaze me that I'm talking to our friends in Bangladesh, sitting in my little office in the hospital, and it's evening, so you're probably sitting in your homes. Michelle, by magic to me, has brought us together. There's still some limitations here. So you aren't able to speak to us, but I can see your written word. It's the same with the other communication, that we have to be very careful when we're communicating by email, or even in this regard, because people can't see our faces, our body language, and our tone. Nor if I'm speaking to you, I can't see your faces, so I don't know if you're with me or if I've lost you. So while communication by email It gives us a little bit more freedom and flexibility. It can also cause some issues. Coming together is a nice opportunity because we get the tone, we can read body language, and we have a better understanding. We're also very alert to the fact that if there's a problem, we can pick up on it very quickly. And that's the point that I want to make here, that if you're sensing any sort of a problem, you want to jump on it quickly to make sure that you understand the problem and you work to resolve the problem. And unfortunately, it's been my experience over many, many years that often that communication will be coming from national. And whether it just be communication about getting information out, requesting information back, picking up on a problem, it often will be initiated through the national organization. And then often you have to spend a lot of time, if you're not hearing back, reminding your volunteers that you need feedback and information from them. And you need to just check in to make sure everybody's doing okay. Are they getting the information they need? Do they have enough time to do it? How are they doing trying to get the work done on their end? How can you help them? So a lot of mentoring, but again, often that will be a little bit top heavy in terms of national, staying on top of that communication piece. As it says on the slide here, ineffective communication can really make or break a relationship. That's all I really wanted to say, because, you know, in a short time, there's so much we can do, only so much we can do, but I want to make sure that we have lots of time for your questions. So while I've been speaking into the mic, the way the office is set up, I can't really keep my eye on the screen very well. So Michelle, if we've got questions, maybe you can moderate those for us.
So we have one question that came. So it's how can chapters be incorporated into the national organization, and how are they represented in the National Association Board? So what's the difference between a chapter and a branch is the second part of the question.
So I'll start with that, and I might work backwards. So if we go back to that slide, and I'm going to see if I can still move us back. So if we look at the slide here, single organizations, for instance, could be HSB, yes, Hemophilia Bangladesh. So you would be in that top box there. A chapter would be perhaps a province or a state. Okay? And then the difference between that chapter and a branch, as I mentioned, if you've got a really large state, a large province, you have to break down into smaller regions. So that branch or that regional office, yes, thank you. The regional office and the branch could actually be reporting into the chapter, who would report into the national organization. So in fact, you probably wouldn't have a branch office or a regional office. You'd probably just call them one or the other. But you could use that word branch to substitute for chapter, but I think it would be just easier if you called it a chapter, if that's what it really is. However, in the beginning, you could choose, you might just say, well, Bangladesh, in terms of our population, is pretty big. We're not really ready to have a chapter. But maybe we need to have a branch office in one or other two locations. So you could do that. How do they represent on the national board? Again, as we move along and we do a little bit more on governance, you would work that out through your constitution or your bylaws. You would figure out what the representation might be. And you might choose to have one representative from each of your chapters on your national board. You may choose, as we used to do at CHS, to have representation by population. So in Ontario, that's one of our chapters here in Canada. We have the largest population in the country. So based on the population, we may choose to have more than one representative on our board. A smaller province like Prince Edward Island, where Dan comes from, has a very small population, so they would likely just have one representative on the board. But recently we have moved to a model where we have one representative from each chapter, so that voice is heard at the board. And that's where we would go back to the slide that Eric started with, where you have equitable representation. I'm just leaning over to look at the other question here. How can that be incorporated? Again, you have to look at, and I'll let Eric jump in here as well, you have to look at the rules and regulations in Bangladesh, and you would write that into your constitution, your bylaws, to how you're incorporated. And you'd have to look at state or provincial laws and regulations just to make sure that you comply with that. But Eric, you probably have more to say on that one.
No, actually, I don't, Pam. I think you've covered it well. There'd be, in terms of how the chapters can be incorporated in the national organization, as long as you're complying with whatever regulations there could be numbers of different ways. For instance, with the World Federation, we don't have chapters, we have national member organizations. But when we elect 2 lay people, the nominations come from the regions of the world. So in that sense, there's a possibility of a voice coming out of a region. Just different ways of organizing how we get the appropriate representation from parts of our country into the national board.
Good. We have another question, which is how can the resources be shared with the chapter? So how does that operate from national to chapter, and perhaps vice versa?
Eric, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it can be done in a number of different ways. Sometimes chapters in their fundraising contribute to national to help national meet its budget and do the things it needs to do to support the chapter. Sometimes, if the national organization is stronger at fundraising, they will distribute some of those funds to their chapters. And it would depend upon how best things would need to work in Bangladesh with regard to the way things are set up there. And those are mainly financial resources. When I think of programming resources, again, both CHS and WorldFed, the parent organization has resources that they send to chapters or around the world to help chapters or national member organizations become stronger, these kind of things. Did you want to add anything, Pam?
No, I think you've got it. I guess it is, again, by consensus, how will you share those resources?
Right.
You have to decide, first of all, how much have you got to share, and then look at how you do it, and then be accountable for how you're doing that.
Yeah, if I can add, I think it's important to be transparent about that so that everybody knows how the resource sharing mechanisms operate and to which levels. If I can move along, we have another question. It's from Najmul. He's asking what are the challenges that they might face in Bangladesh in developing chapters, because this is something they'd like to do. So they're just wondering, what hurdles they may encounter, what kind of challenges they may face.
I think the first thing is you have to decide, are you ready for chapters? Do you need chapters at this point? And if you're ready to do that, the next thing that I would say to overcome the challenges and the hurdles would be is you have to find some key leaders in those chapters. Now, you may not do it all at once. So we've got 10 Canadian chapters. We've got 10 provinces here. You might look at how many chapters do we need, and are we starting with one that would just maybe cover a particular region? Are we going to jump ahead and do 2 or 3 at a time? So whatever that number might be and what seems right for you, you have to make sure that you've got leadership who will be ready to work on the ground in that area to develop it. And so to help you overcome the chapters as well, you have to kind of lay down that framework, do the groundwork for what it would mean to be a chapter, what you need to have to be a chapter, how do you meet if there are different regulations because they're provincial or state laws there, what you need to do to make sure that you're meeting those. So it's the legwork, it's the beginning, it's preparing to do it, finding that leader who will champion it and find people in the region to help them and who will take on the responsibility of linking back to national. So I think that's your first challenge.
I'd like to suggest that's the main challenge. It's really the volunteer leadership and engagement. You want to start a chapter, but if you don't have that, it's not going to happen. And if there's good volunteer engagement and leadership available, chances are that'll bubble up and kind of say, oh, I think we're ready for a chapter there. So I really agree with you, Pam. Well said.
Just one more thing along with that. After you've done one, and that might be a suggestion, start with one, figure out what went well and what didn't go so well, and engage those people in the chapter to help mentor the next chapter along.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. I don't see any on the screen. So if anybody has a question, please type it now. I'll give you about 10 seconds to do so.
You'd have a countdown timer on the screen.
Okay, so I see no more questions at the moment, so I'd like us to move to the next part of the presentation. And there will be also a question period after the second part, and we may keep maybe a couple minutes at the end globally. So if there's any questions relating to the first part, you can always come back if you have new thoughts to answer those. So at this point, I would like to invite Marian to present. Unfortunately, Dan cannot be here, so Milena and Marian will be presenting. So Marian will begin this next section.
Be able to, as everybody has said, be able to communicate around the world together over this very important topic.
Okay, Marian, you need to get closer to your speaker. We have difficulty hearing.
Oh, you have difficulty. Okay, is this any? Okay, there we go. Is this any better now?
Maybe a little bit closer. Eric's sound was better than yours.
All right, I'll try to talk louder. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, as I was saying, really that Pam and Eric just put together for us moves us well into thinking about roles and responsibilities for council members and other volunteers that you will want to recruit. And the comments that I jotted down, just as Pam and Eric were talking recently, was, a strong parent organization. HSB as the national organization for Bangladesh being very strong is so important as you consider moving forward into developing chapters in other regions and things like that. So well done if you move this forward. And your HSB constitution that you sent to us, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful for Milena, Dan, and I as we worked on the council roles and responsibilities. So as we thought about this, one of the things that is really important as we consider the roles and responsibilities and recruiting people to our organization, CHS, World Federation, or the Hemophilia Society in Bangladesh, is what are the key messages we want to communicate and help people to grasp. So one of the key messages, why are we doing what we are doing? Keep them simple and clear. Keep the mission and vision in front of people and keep it in front of ourselves. So I think the very easy one to remember is World Federation's treatment for all. So as we think about what we are about, this is what we are looking to do, to procure treatment for all. And I put down there, the CHS one as well, but just something to think about as you consider how you want to recruit people for positions on your council or people to participate in some other ways of volunteering, but keeping that mission and that vision, saying this is what we're about. So it makes it very clear for them. And one of the other things as we were looking through in thinking about roles and responsibilities, it is important to define your target audience. And so hemophilia, of course, is, and that's what's represented in what you have in your constitution. But we had a question, and so simply put it in here for you to consider, is are other bleeding disorders, such as von Willebrand, considered at all to be included? So it's not something to be answered right now, but to be raised to say, are there other bleeding disorders that we need to consider including? Maybe yes, maybe no, but what might those be if necessary? And then through that, as you define your audience, then determining your focus to keep everything really simple and clear and interesting as you talk with people. And so let's just quickly to get into the specific roles that you have already defined really, really well in your constitution. But as we looked at the roles and tried to evaluate them, knowing what each of us had experienced through both our provincial and national roles, the role of the president is pretty extensive. Like, whoa, Nerl, you're doing an incredible job. And so what are some of the areas there that could be taken out perhaps and assigned to someone else? So an example that we put in was media relations. Could someone else take this on? We don't know, but that is a question that would be good to ask. And then moving down into the vice president's role, which is, again, well-defined as position transitioning into the president's role. That's very good because succession planning is so crucial for an organization to really move forward. And then the general secretary, again, wonderful the way you say they handle all the administrative functions, and there can be an awful lot of administrative functions, that's for sure. And then down to the organizing secretary, we had a couple of questions that we were wondering about. Were the activities, it says that they are responsible for planning and running all organizational activities. So our question was, are these activities related only to member activities, so you have an educational weekend or day like you did when we were there in March of 2013, which was related to only members, or is it also that there are external activities that you want the organizing secretary to be organizing as well, perhaps fundraising events, or are there other PR events, public relations, things like that, that you are asking the organizing secretary to run, or that is not a part of it, but might be considered down the road. Again, just wanted to present that as something we saw and thought, I wonder if that could be addressed. And then the treasurer, of course, again, it's very clearly defined. You've outlined that very, very well. And I think you've done an excellent job of accountability and transparency with with everybody on the council. As we looked at the members at large, and as we were thinking about the various activities and how you want to move forward and create greater capacity, is it possible to those 6 members at large to create a portfolio for each one of them and to rotate, again, trying to help people have a variety of experiences and develop their competencies every 2 to 4 years. And so we also then just put down some ideas, perhaps 2 members. Again, they can work together so a person doesn't feel like they are doing everything on their own. And I think that's very important to not feel like everything just, is on your shoulders. That can be very exhausting and burdensome and creates burnout. So those were some things, public liaison, fundraising, volunteer membership committee, are there things that could be added in to your council positions in this. And then one of the other aspects we noticed and it was wonderful to see, was your medical advisory board. And as we talked this through, the 3 of us, we wondered if it would also be useful and advisable to consider creating an internal to your hemophilia community, internal medical advisory board, which actually allows some of those who they're not medical people, but they have a bit of an understanding of what goes on in the medical community and have extra concern for how things move forward. And it allows them to begin dialoguing with them in a constructive, healthy way. I know we have a medical advisory board, and it's made up of lay people as well as professional medical people. Again, just something to consider as we look at roles and responsibilities. And then creating terms of reference for council members, outlining expectations and length of term to serve. Those can be so freeing for people because then they say when they sign up to, yes, I'll be on council and it's for these many years, it's freeing to say, yes, I know that there's an end to this, or I can renew if possible. So again, it allows people to be more cognizant and aware of what is expected of them, and to know that they don't have to be signing on for in one sense. And of course, then creating appropriate job descriptions. Then I put down those three there. And for later, I have several attachments which Michelle will send out as examples for you to look at and take bits and pieces from them to find what fits for you in Bangladesh. And then as well as websites to go to just read it through and see what is there and what is useful. Oftentimes just looking at something and gives you some ideas, at least it certainly does for me. And then I know how to tweak and make it my own or make it work for CHS.
And Marion, if you want, we can flash some of those on the screen if you're interested. I have them available.
We could, why don't we wait until the end?
Okay.
That would be okay. And now, perhaps we can move over to Milena. Would you take the next slides and move us forward with those? Milena?
Milena is taking over. Hold one moment, please. Okay, Milena. Are you still there, Milena? Okay, I'm not hearing Milena.
What was the mute? Unmute again, Michelle?
Okay, okay, there you are.
Hello?
We hear you well. Thank you, Milena.
Okay, it's all yours, Milena.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be part of this project, and I will just read the next two slides, and it is about, I think, just a second, the questions, yeah. We have a few questions for you, something that we were not sure of, and just wanted you to think about it. One of the questions is, if you are not a member of Bangladesh Society, do you still get Factor 8? And we were wondering about that. The other question was, covered of only 10% of membership can be poor and not paying for subscription. And is it a current reality that needs to be investigated so there is a treatment and care for everyone? Because as we understood that 30%, 31% of population is below poverty line. So that's a concern, and just wondering about that. Are you allowed treatment in the city if you are from elsewhere? Who is on the advisory board? Is it similar to CHS executive that comprises of president, VP, general secretary, treasurer, and organizing secretary? Are there non-medical members on the medical advisory board as it currently stands? And that we were just talking about that as an important part. Next steps would be...
Milena, if I can ask you just to speak a little bit more slowly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next steps. We identify 7 steps, and the first one is to create HSB message and vision statement. I mean, we saw your message statement and vision statement. I have them in front of me, and we were just thinking maybe that you should look at
maybe, the mission statement is maybe possibly a little bit narrow in the way it is. It seems like more like a goal to set up comprehensive hemophilia center for the treatment of hemophiliacs. So just an idea to think about, and that's number one step. Number two, define your audience, including determining your focus. And next one, review current executive council roles. What is too much for one position? What is missing or needed to be added or removed? Fourth, review sample job description as we talk about it. Create portfolio for the 6 council member positions. Create terms of reference for all the positions, and create job descriptions for each desired position. And that would be all for me.
Elena.
You're welcome.
So, ready to entertain any questions that would relate to this? Michelle, if you would like to post, you had mentioned something about posting or flashing on the screen some of those attachments. Is that correct?
That's correct. So which one would you like me to put up? We have the tips for developing job descriptions.
That would be probably one of the best ones.
Okay, and you can maximize the screen by pushing the maximize button. Everybody. Actually, I can do it for you. There we go.
Okay, so there, well, first we'll, the job description, the tips to creating a job description, Michelle has just posted. Again, looking at that, saying what are the things that need to be addressed. The screen is a little tricky to see, actually, for me, so anyway. But those are things just to consider incorporating as you create a job description. So hopefully something like that, take that and then look at the others and see where things fit in, recognizing that the various attachments that Michelle will send you, event coordinator, episodic volunteer, etc., they're created for CHS roles. So you would want to take those and recognize where they're coming from and then devise your own. Now, there's a question, internal advisory board, the medical internal advisory board. Again, back to what we were commenting on is you have an advisory board that the council, from what I gather, has created, and I'm assuming that a medical advisory board is there to move things forward, whether it's in procuring of product, perhaps, or in working with any blood banks that are there in Bangladesh, or with the hospitals. Is this? I wasn't quite sure, so that's why we asked that question. And then knowing that if you've created that advisory board with all these people, what kind of voice do you have into that advisory board, which is why we were thinking possibly setting up something separate that has more of the lay people involved in it. Is this helpful to you? My question, my answering? And if someone else has a thought to say, please feel free to do that. Eric, Pam, Elena, Michelle.
There's another question here. Can you see it, Marian? So we accept other bleeding disorders, for example, von Willebrand, as members.
Feeling you probably did have other bleeding disorders, but we weren't sure. That's why we asked that question.
Okay.
I wonder though, if you're in your constitution, it only talks about hemophilia. So identify all blood disorders, example hemophilia patients. So that would, I guess, when you say example all hemophilia patients, that means that you are trying to identify anyone with a bleeding disorder.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Please type them in the text chat. So thank you, Marianne, for your new concepts for us. How the board identifies the skills and experience that new board members should bring to the organization. How is that done?
I think part of it is looking at what you want to do with your organization, how you want to move it forward, what are the skills that are needed to do that. That's why the governance part was so important in the beginning. Where do you want to go? What are those skills that are needed? Anybody else have a comment on that?
Yeah, for example, if to move the Bangladeshi society forward, you need to do some legal work. One of the skills on the board that would be helpful to have is someone who has legal experience, a lawyer or something like that. Then you go out and among your networks of people and friends, look for a person that would be willing and excited about helping the Bangladeshi society accomplish that, what they're doing as a society, the vision, but brings that particular needed skill to bear. That would be an example. To do your work well, what kind of skills do you need on the board? Do we have those? If we don't, where can we find them?
Excellent.
I'd just like to point out that there are some boards and some organizations in other countries that have actually physicians or other healthcare professionals involved in their board. So sometimes it can be useful, but you have to be careful that they don't dominate, that there's a balance between the patient perspective and the healthcare professional perspective.
Right.
So in fact, in many countries, they've tried to strike that balance and even give greater power and presence to the actual patients on their board. So this is maybe just a cautionary comment that I'm making as you're thinking of maybe having a mix of different kinds of skills and knowledge on your board. There's another question here.
I'd like to add, it's Pam, is that sometimes when we come together, we're just so focused on the work we're doing together with bleeding disorders that's what we're talking about. I want to give you an example. Recently, someone that I know quite well, I first met her when we were doing our twinning with South Africa. I never knew that she had a pilot's license until very recently, and I've probably known her for close to 10 years now. So do I need someone with a pilot's license on my board? Probably not, but that's my example that sometimes we don't know enough about the scope and the skills and the things that our volunteers like to do. And if we sometimes just put the question out there, we find that, oh boy, this person has experience as an accountant or whatever it is that you're looking for that we just weren't aware of. So sometimes it's just a case of ask.
Okay. The next question is, should we appoint a media relations person other than a board member?
That's a very good question. It's worth considering. You know the people around you better than we do. So if you feel that there is someone who is who can represent you well in the media, who is not a part of the board, but you could have a close connection with them, then perhaps that would work. Again, these are things that you can do one way or the other. Neither way is necessarily the right way. What works best for you in your situation.
Yeah, so you can actually bring in, I think, people with expertise either to sit on your board or to be adjunct people that basically you consult and you work with. So another example, in addition to the media relations person, and I think I'm thinking of where HSB is right now, is you also may want to have someone who's very familiar, for example, with government relations and how to work with government, and who has a good understanding of the ins and outs of the government system in Bangladesh, so that they can help you navigate that system in terms of the advocacy work you will be doing in Bangladesh. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I see no one typing at this point. I can give it another 5-10 seconds. Okay, while we wait for any further questions or comments, is there any additional comments from our presenters that you would like to make before we close the webinar?
Just to say, I think you all are doing an excellent job in Bangladesh, and we really sense your desire to move forward to really find more people who are dealing with hemophilia and bleeding disorders. And it's from my perspective, and I think all of us here at CHS, it's a privilege to be able to work with you in this. And I mean, it's learning for us as well. So it's great to be on the same page with you.
This is Eric. I'll just add my voice to Marion's, but same thing. Yeah, the amazing work that you're doing is very meaningful as we watch all that you're accomplishing in light of limited resources. So the extent that this helps and moves you forward, we're very excited to work with you and appreciate all that you're doing.
Okay. We have another question from Marion asking if you could please say something about the job responsibilities of the HSB regional office. So what role could the regional office be playing?
The role of the regional office.
Yeah, job responsibilities of an HSB regional office.
Really good question. I wonder if that actually could be more of a question that either Pam or Eric, because since you dealt with the organizational side of things, much of it is, from my experience of being in a regional office here and working as a volunteer, we do a lot of things locally that could not be done from the national organization coming in to do those things. So we take on a lot of those responsibilities. But we also depend on either our Hemophilia Ontario, which would be kind of our parent organization, or CHS, to have resources for us, so materials that are needed for various activities, or expertise, making a phone call saying, how do we do this down here? Those are things that we look for from the parent organization, which is why it really is important that the parent organization is strong as they consider developing more of the regional offices. Pam, Eric, can you...
Does the HSB have a regional office now?
Can somebody answer that question? Do you have a regional office?
You were there today.
In Chittagong, is there an office there?
Yeah, we don't have an answer to that question,
Okay.
but I believe that's something they're looking at developing. From my understanding, they have the office in Dhaka, which is the national office, but I guess in planning, yeah, I think that no regional office yet. We just have the answer that just came in. So I think they're looking at developing that. So they're trying to get a better understanding of the role of the regional office. So I think what was being described in terms of providing support and resources and materials is really a typical role that a regional office can play. Typically, normally there would be a staff or part-time staff. This is what we have in Canada, for example, in Manitoba and in Ontario. But it can also be volunteer manned. So, of course, it would be probably more part-time, but to provide that kind of support and coordination role is important, and especially in terms of implementing some of the programs that you have. This is where the regional office can actually play a key role, is in that implementation capacity and coordination.
And certainly, just to go along with that, people in the regional office, because they are in that region, they will know those who have hemophilia or the other bleeding disorders more specifically than someone coming down from DACA. So there's a greater potential for knowledge of the people, helping them with their condition, but then also knowing them to be able to recruit them to possible other positions within, the organization.
Right. And Mahmoud is asking if we can say something about how the chapter offices in Canada operate and are overseen by the CHS. Are you comfortable answering that, any of the presenters? I know that we also have Hélène Bourgaise on the phone. She's our national office person here who works with the chapters and the regional office in terms of the relations. So Hélène, if you want to answer that, feel free to jump in also.
What exactly is the question? Because I don't see it.
Yeah, he's asking how chapter offices in Canada operate and how it's overseen by the CHS. You get that, Hélène?
And in Canada, we work in collaboration with our regional offices, but they are independent. This is at the national level, and even at the provincial level, what Sam was saying, that we have chapters within the chapter in Ontario, because it's the largest chapter in Canada. There are several regional offices, and in the past, and now it's changing, but they were working in collaboration, but they were really independent. Each one had their own board. Now there's only one board who's overseeing all of the chapters. The reason why there's so many chapters to provide some programs and services to reach out to the members, because when the province is very large, it's easier to have regional office where they can deliver the service and chapter to the members in their area.
Right. So, for example, in Ontario, just so you understand, because it's a big province, there will be a regional, like a sub office in Ottawa, in London, Ontario, in Sudbury, Ontario, in Toronto, Ontario. So they provide services to those sub-regions within the province as a sub-regional office.
So if I could just jump in, again, it's Pam. When we talk about a chapter, there may not actually be an office per se. A chapter could be a group of individuals coming together and functioning, whether it would be in someone's living room in their home or maybe someplace where they would choose to meet. They would still keep all their records and everything, have a safe and secure way of keeping their finances, their records, the names of people they serve, their programs, and all of that. Maybe it resides on a computer. So we have chapters who actually don't have an office in terms of a physical space. So because we're over our time here, and I'll defer to you, Michelle, on this, but I think that's a really good question. And I think that's a question that maybe we could take some time and either create some slides and show you kind of the steps that you might take if you were setting that up. But in a nutshell, or in a very condensed way to try to explain that, if you will, is that often a chapter office, as you're calling it there in the question, is really just a mini version of what's going on in the national office. And again, we would work on some of the things that we said previously, according to whatever the Constitution and the bylaws are, to make sure that those things were in place. And that chapter office could, in fact, be operated or manned or resourced by a volunteer or someone that you hire. So there's a whole lot of things there, and I just don't think we can do that justice to you in the time that we have left together today.
Yeah. And there's a final question, which again, it's asking, what are the best practices in terms of raising an agenda for the board meeting, and who can set up at the actual agenda for the board meeting. Maybe someone can just answer that quickly. I had, prior to this webinar, when we were sending documents and information about good governance, I had actually sent some documents about board and board agendas. So perhaps you can look at that, and we can resend some of that information after the webinar. But maybe someone, if you could maybe just answer that question quickly. I think Pam, perhaps, given that you chaired the board at one point, how are the agendas put together?
I'm happy to do that. It's usually the responsibility of the person chairing the meeting, whether it be the board or whether it be a committee, to make sure that you have an agenda that outlines what it is that needs to be done during the meeting, and that is sent out so that everyone has access to the agenda. The agenda is sometimes often set up by looking back at the previous minutes, the old business, that kind of thing, knowing what's come through that needs to be taken care of. But as chair, I usually would ask people as well if they want to submit agenda items. So if there's business or information that they feel that they need, if they send it to me, that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you very much, Pam. We're already 13 minutes past the hour, so we've gone a bit over our time. So I'd like to conclude our webinar for today. There will be other opportunities for the twinning team from Bangladesh and Canada to interact further on these questions. So I would like to suggest that in the near future we'll be convening a teleconference. There's other business that we also have to be discussing soon. So I'll be in touch with everybody to try and set a date for our next twinning committee teleconference. So on this, I'd like to thank everybody for your participation today. We will be sending, after this webinar, a copy of the slides, as well as copies of the job description documents and other documents that Marion was referring to. So you'll be getting that by email. I may not have the email for all the participants that were here, so I would ask people in Bangladesh to please share the email with their colleagues. And hopefully the recording of the webinar went well, so if it is good quality, I will also provide that to the participant. So once again, thank you everybody for your participation, and good luck with your next steps, and we'll be talking again soon.
Thank you,
Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now,